Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin.
And pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am really praying that Dr. Virginia is feeling better than I am today. I have been battling now just a whole summer cold sinus infection thing for a week and just still have not quite gotten all back together again. But we are persevering and I am pushing forward and I am counting on Dr. Virginia to help me through this one. But I hope you are having a good morning, Virginia.
Yes, I am. And I'm so sorry that your throat is so scratchy and that you've been under the weather. So I'm excited for us to be talking today. But I'm sorry you're not feeling great.
I am always excited when we can get together. It's really funny because that's what I think I've mentioned before. My 95-year-old mother lives here with us. And so she was like, "You're not going to be working today, are you? You're not well." And I was like, I have not had a chance to sit down with Virginia and talk for a while. And so I am not missing this today. So we are going to make this work. We're going to make it work.
Amen.
We have a topic that we're super excited about today. Coming off of Vacation Bible School, it's a topic that I hear a lot of people, discussing, and we started talking about it the other day. And so we thought that this might be helpful information for you because during Vacation Bible School, we typically have a lot of teenage volunteers because I know a lot of youth pastors usually want their students to really get involved with Vacation Bible School. And so they really help us push to have these volunteers come and help. And my experience was usually once those teenagers got a little bit of a taste of working with the kids and being in children's ministry, they would actually ask if they could volunteer to help throughout the year. And along with the blessing of teenage volunteers comes a lot of other concerns and stresses that can make it a little more complicated than our usual regular volunteers that we use each week. And so Virginia and I thought that we would take a few minutes to talk about how we handle those teenage volunteers in our classrooms and our churches.
One of our very first considerations about working with teenage volunteers who are helping us in the children's ministry is remembering that they are still minors. So in most typical circumstances, your church's liability insurance company is not going to view them the same way they would as an adult as far as providing a level of oversight and supervision for children. So basically, your teenage helpers cannot count as an actually over 18 legal adult unless they are over 18. But if you've got even the most responsible, helpful, wonderful 16-year-old helping you in your ministry, they are still a minor. Right. And so as adults, one, they're going to count toward our kid ratio. And two, they are still our responsibility for protection, oversight, guidance, direction. They need to be serving alongside to other adults, even if they are, say, in an opportunity where they can take the lead and maybe you're intentionally letting them lead a lesson or putting them in more of an opportunity to have a leadership role. They are still a minor. They do still need to be serving alongside two adults. Right. We are still responsible for them in the same way that we are responsible for the children in the ministry. And so it can be really tempting to have a teen alongside one adult, but that is typically not going to be recommended by your church's liability insurance company.
No, because they cannot be your second person in a room. And really, technically, they cannot be your third person in a room. If you have a couple that is serving or relatives that are serving together and you need that third person in the classroom with them, they technically cannot be that third person. And I always looked at it this way. One of the reasons why we have the 2 adult rule is because of if there is something that happens, if someone becomes ill, if somebody gets hurt, if there are issues, you have to think of it as a teenager cannot testify in a courtroom. And so that is what limits their ability to be that extra person. It's not that we don't trust those very responsible kids or that we don't think that they would be, helpful and useful in that way. But we have to look at it as our safety and security guidelines. And they also obviously cannot have background checks. So you have that issue as well. So those are the legal reasons why we can't have a teenager in the room in that way. But teenagers are excellent to be runners, to be buddies, to be able to help in the room, to help, like you said too, like we always had youth Sundays where the teenagers would come in and actually lead the lesson in the classrooms. But again, they were coming in as that extra person, not as one of my safety and security required adults. So, yeah. I also think that one of the things that can be really helpful when you have teenage volunteers, if you set your policies and procedures for them ahead of time and have that in writing in part of your policy and procedure handbook. So I would make that like its own little section where you talk about the fact that they cannot be left alone with the children, how they, all of those kinds of rules that you're going to have for them. Anything that you can have in writing ahead of time is going to really help you as you work with these volunteers in your classroom. So you want to think through all of the things that you expect, how they should dress, how they communicate with the kids. You want to mention cell phones at that point and working with their friends and all of those kinds of things. Any kind of issue that you think that you might have with a teenage volunteer, you want to get all of those policies and procedures in writing so that you can clearly show them their expectations.
Yeah. Yes. However you do it in advance, I think having it in writing is crucial. And also having training opportunities where you are, directly communicating and reinforcing and clarifying and asking questions or answering questions and asking questions too, maybe. But answering questions and really clarifying those expectations for our teenage helpers of, this is what's expected of you. This is the particular role that you will be fulfilling. You can do A, B, or C, where you're helping as a rotation leader or you're helping in this role or you're helping in that role. That way they understand the policies as well as exactly what job they'll be doing during VBS and what that looks like. And so I think just clarifying those expectations on the front end is so important and so helpful. And then it also helps you on the back end whenever it's time to maybe hold them accountable for something that has definitely been communicated to them.
Well, and I think it's helpful for the adults that will be working with them as well, because it is very easy for our volunteers that do not understand some of the safety and security issues that we have with teenagers to say, oh, well, it's okay. My teenage helper can walk this 4-year-old down to the pickup area or to the desk or to crafts, by themselves, or they can take them to the restroom or they can do those guys. Because you just, if you're not familiar, if you don't work in children's ministry every single week, if you don't have the background to really understand why we have these protections in place, not just for our children, but also for our teenagers and for our leaders. And so it's really important, I think, for our adult leaders to be able to see, oh, okay, these are the guidelines. These are the things that I need to remember when I am working with my teenage helper. And that will just, once you have everything in writing, it just helps you to be able to come back. And it also helps with those questions a lot, because if they say, well, why can't my helper do this? Well, our church's policy is that they are not allowed to be alone with the child, or they're not allowed to take a child alone to another area of the church, or whatever the rule is that they're asking about, so that gives you a little bit more authority than just saying, well, I just don't, I don't want you to do this, to be able to say, well, our church's policy. And you're going to find those same policies within, I'm sure, your insurance information from the church is going to have very specific guidelines for people helping that are under 18, those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that you refer back to the policies from your church insurance company as well when you're looking at how you're going to build that into your policy and procedure handbook. One of the things that I always did with all of my volunteers is that I had a page in that policy and procedure handbook that they would sign, that they had read everything, and that they would agree to follow the rules and the policies that have been outlined in the handbook. That was something that I just did with all of my volunteers. Whenever we would start out each year, we would go back over it, and every year they would turn in that page to me. And so that was something that I included in with my teenage helpers as well, because I wanted them to realize that they were taking responsibility, that they were signing, that they had read it, and that they were signing, and they were making a commitment to our ministry to follow the guidelines that we had set forth. Because I don't know about you, Virginia, but I know that for me, anytime I had a new volunteer come into the ministry, I tried to do a one-on-one meeting with them, if it had to be on the phone, it had to be on the phone. But I really tried to do it in person, where I would go over the handbook and we would talk about it. And then again, we would always have those meetings at the beginning, usually in the fall, when we were doing our fall kickoff, we would have meetings where we would go over any changes in the handbook, or just go back over our real rules. And then that is when they would sign those papers. And if I needed to update anyone's background checks, that's when I did all that kind of paperwork. But I always included those teenage helpers in those conversations. Like, I made sure that I met with them at the beginning when they first said they wanted to volunteer. If it was a large group of them, like, for example, for Vacation Bible School, we would do a meeting just with them. The youth pastor and I, or the student minister and I, would set up a meeting with everyone that wanted to volunteer, and we would go over the handbook, and we would do those same things with them. And that way you do it in a large group. But especially if those kids are wanting to help throughout the year, it's just nice to have those one-on-one opportunities where you can just kind of get an idea of what they enjoy doing and what they're wanting to get out of volunteering. Not just so that they're not necessarily, because a lot of times teenage helpers want to help in children's ministry because they don't want to participate in their own student ministry. And so I always wanted to take that moment to make sure that they had a sincere reason for wanting to volunteer and why they were wanting to. And I also had very specific rules about what they could miss in their student ministry and what they could not miss in their student ministry, because I did not want them hiding out in our children's ministry. And so it wasn't something that they could commit to every single week. Like, they could not, unless I happened to serve in a church where we had multiple hours, where the kids could still do their own Sunday school class and do their own worship and then still help. But that was few and far between when I had those opportunities to be able to do that. But I had very specific expectations when it came to participating in student ministry.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good point of students who maybe want to hide out in the children's ministry, and it can be tempting to let them because we need help.
Yes.
But at the same time, like, that does a disservice to the students if we enable them to get around the ministry that is built for them, the ministries that are going to pour into them. And so just wanting to, I think, especially work with your student pastor as well, and make sure that you're both comfortable and in agreement on, what the expectations are, what's okay, what's not okay, and making that very clear to the students.
Yeah. Well, and that's something too that even parents will sometimes want their kids to be with them when they are serving in children's ministry, or they don't see a problem with their teenagers spending a lot of time in children's ministry. It doesn't worry them or concern them. And so having those guidelines written in the policy and procedure handbook, it being a church policy that I've worked out with our student minister, also again gives me that opportunity to tell parents, because parents can tend to say, well, I'm okay with it, so they should be allowed to do it. It gives me that opportunity to say, well, our church policy, we've worked on this very carefully. It's our church policy. And this is why we've chosen to make sure that they can be a part of the children's ministry and volunteer, but they don't lose out on their own experiences and their own spiritual growth and their own relationship with Jesus. And so it's finding those ways to help parents understand that, and having it all written, having those policies and those expectations right at the very beginning, knowing how you're going to handle that is only going to help you in the long run with any confusion or concern that might come up.
And I think too, it's also, in my mind, part of a broader culture as well of kind of not letting anybody hide out in the children's ministry. Because that's one thing that I'm very grateful that all of our church leadership, top down, are very adamant on, is that we don't want anyone serving every single ministry time.
Right.
We want people to commit to serve, but we also want them to commit to be a part of a small group and be a part of worship and be a part of other ministries, to where they are both serving and being taught. And so, I think I'm very grateful to serve in a church that has a broader culture of, yes, the expectation is that you will serve, but also the expectation is that you will sit under teaching as well. And so I think having those two expectations equally in balance is important for a healthy volunteer culture in general, including whenever it comes to teenagers.
Right. Along with those policies that I set in place, I thought we might talk about a few of the expectations that I always had with teenage helpers in a classroom, whether it be VBS or on a regular Sunday morning. I did my best to make sure that I teamed the teenage volunteer with an adult, as opposed to having two teenage volunteers come into a classroom together. Because if you do have very close friends coming into a classroom together, then there is just a huge temptation of them kind of being in the corner, chatting with each other, being very easily distracted. And so I really tried to work more on the idea of, okay, here is an adult volunteer. This is your teenage volunteer. You guys are going to do work together, so that way they had a specific person that they would be responsible to, that they would have to keep them focused and to keep them on task. And so, and I know it's really hard because they want to hang out with their friends. So it is really tempting to want to stand in the corner and chat with your friends during the class time. And so I think it was really important that I worked as much as I could to help keep them focused, not ruin their fun, but help keep them focused for the reason that they're there.
And I think it's equally important to help the adult volunteers understand how to lead and direct and assign tasks to their student helper. This was kind of a conversation that I had recently, again, coming out of VBS, that you can't expect a student helper to, look around a room, identify what needs to be done, go do it. They're kids. They're still kids. Some of them may be able to do that. Some of them, may have that kind of understanding and initiative and insight. But for the most part, adults who are working with teen helpers need to almost have kind of like a list of, like, a job description. To put it, a job description for what they want their teen to do. Okay, you're helping in this crafts rotation at Vacation Bible School. After one group leaves, I need you to reset the table, to put the lids back on the markers, put the markers back in the container. Whenever the kids come in, I need you to hand out the supplies and the pencils. Okay. I need you to help the kids, with opening up their glue bottles, because some of the glue bottles get stuck. I think it does it can be very helpful for adults, but it also requires the adult in the room to think differently about executing their time, and
Right.
you really have to think differently about how you're going to lead this classroom, because you're not just leading the children, you're leading your helper to be able to
Right.
be the most effective they can be, because most of them they're not going to know, and understandably they may not feel comfortable just doing something on their own, because
Right.
again, they're kids. Like,
Right.
they ask permission to go to the bathroom. Like, that's still part of their life. And so
Right.
as the adults, we need to have sort of clear job descriptions, clear expectations, clear sort of task lists for them to do in order to be
Mhm.
the most helpful in their time
Right.
with us.
Right. Right. I've worked with a lot of teenage volunteers over the years, and I have had, I would say I could count on one hand the ones that were really good at taking initiative.
Mm.
I did have a few volunteers over the years that like wanted to be a classroom teacher when they grew up. So
Mm.
they were very focused in on wanting
Mhm.
to teach, and they understood how a classroom was run, and they, because that was part of
Mhm.
who they were and what they wanted to be. But again, out of all of the hundreds of teenage volunteers that I've had, that's just a very small number that have that ability. We talk a lot about brain development and how kids think and how they learn and how they understand. And
Mhm.
teenagers just don't have that necessarily, they don't necessarily have that ability to be able to take initiative and to be able to anticipate needs. They really need to be told exactly what to do.
Mhm.
And so it's having that opportunity to really be very clear in your expectations and helping your adult volunteers that are working with them to be very clear in their expectations for them as well.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's usually where that difficulty comes from, because I don't think that the teenage volunteers mean to not be helpful or
Mm-mm.
mean to kind of hang around and just talk to each other, but also they're not sure what they should do or what they need to do. And so that's going to be their default. We always say that kids are going to find something to fill their time with if we don't give
Yeah.
them something to do. And it's the same for teenagers. It works exactly the same.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that those expectations are very clear. And I figure out part of that at the very beginning when I have those meetings with them and I talk with them about what they're interested in. If I can place them in areas that they truly have a general interest, if they really like crafts, if they really like recreation, if they really like teaching a Bible story, I try to look at what their strengths are, what their hobbies are, if they love music, if they sing, if they play an instrument, finding those kinds of things that they're already interested in. If you can plug them into those areas, then they are going to be more useful and be able to stay on task a little bit better because it's something that they are truly interested in. And then if you have those kids, those teenagers that don't necessarily have an interest, because there's a lot of kids that don't really necessarily know what their thing is when they're a teenager. They don't know what they enjoy doing. Then those are the ones you want to keep active. Those are great ones to be the runners for you, to help you with supplies, to help you do those kinds of activities, because they might get bored in a classroom because they don't feel like they know how to work with crafts or they don't know how to sing. So we don't want to place them somewhere where they're not going to be able to feel useful.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that can definitely be a challenge, particularly if you're in a situation where you have a lot of teen helpers,
Right.
and trying to figure out ways to make sure that they do all feel useful and like they are actually
Hmm.
contributing and doing a job,
Right.
because that's really hard for anyone to feel like, why am I even here? Or
Right.
like they're just kind of being tolerated without
Yeah.
actually making a contribution. And so
Right.
I think being intentional and sometimes being very creative in
Hmm.
what you can have them do. But you know what? I mean, maybe I've just also been like super fortunate in just having, not necessarily every teen helper is like this or available to do this, but there's just been so many times where, okay, we've got to cut out, 50, 100 little tiny boats out of cardstock.
Right.
And you
Right.
just hand them this stack of cardstock and a pair of scissors, and they just do it. Like, they just sit and
Yeah.
do it. Like, God bless them. We had a couple teenage girls this summer who assembled this very time-consuming part of our VBS decorations that we did not know was going to be as time-consuming whenever we embarked on it. And then it was like, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever. And bless their hearts, these two girls, it was like cutting cardstock and taping and gluing and putting all the stuff together. I mean, they just knocked it out. They just did it. They just worked on it. And so, a lot of times those teenage helpers, I've found oftentimes they're just willing to do whatever's needed. Right. And even if it's something kind of random, they'll still do it. You're like, okay, we need to open, 15 cans of, whatever, for our snack. And they just hand them a can opener and they just start cranking. So I think looking around and being creative and being intentional and making sure that they feel like and know they are making a contribution.
Yes, for sure. Well, and I think that that's what it comes back down to. And I don't mean this to sound negative, and it's probably going to come out negative, and I don't mean for it to. But when I've worked with leaders over the years that say they have struggles with teenage volunteers, I think it's typically because we haven't done the prep work ahead of time to make them feel successful in what they're doing. So we haven't given them their expectations. We don't have jobs prepared for them to do when they come help. We don't make it very clear in the classroom what we expect from them. We sort of set them up to fail sometimes when we are not prepared well. And I know that means that is a lot of preparation work that we have to do ahead of time, because we have to set up those policies. We have to have those meetings. We have to, make sure we have the materials ahead. But the blessing of having teenage helpers, the blessing of having all the generations of the church coming together to work with our children, to help them to see just the joys of working with kids and teaching them the Bible and having them to be a part of something is huge. And it's worth every minute of that extra preparation that we have to start with and put into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and another thing too is helping our leaders be intentional in building relationships with their teen helpers. Again, some of them will, but a lot of them probably aren't going to initiate conversation, with the adult that they're helping. I mean, some of them might, but a lot of them are going to be like, so taxes, they may not even know what to talk about with an adult. But as an adult, you can always ask them about their school, ask them about their hobbies, their family, and I think initiating some of those conversations and starting to build those relationships with your teen helpers, one that gives you a little bit of credibility. That way, if you do have to correct them or redirect them or whatever, you're not just some random person. You are Miss Virginia who knows them and who talked to them about their dog for, 20 minutes or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think building those relationships is so important. And one thing that I've seen, from one VBS to the next, is that I will have adult leaders who request the same teen helper. They're like, are they coming back to VBS this year? If they are, I want them in my group. If they want to do that, I want them to come back and help me again. And so I think, it's good. It's good from a leadership perspective, and it's just good from just a spiritual and biblical perspective of, if we are wanting to serve intergenerationally, part of that is getting to know each other and build those relationships and just the value as well of being a safe and caring adult in the life of a teenager is so important. Because I think, one thing that we talk about with teenagers is, mom and dad can say something and it's just in one ear, out the other. But then another adult can say something and they're like, oh, okay. I guess this is real now.
Right.
Now that somebody else said it to me other than my parents.
Oh, that used to drive me so crazy. So crazy. Because our daughter did that to us all the time, where I would, she would come and she would say, oh, you know what? Our student minister said this. And I just thought that was so amazing. And I was like, and you're like, I've said that before. We've talked about this before. Yeah. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. As long as they learn it, that's good. That's all that matters. Yeah. It's just a little pierce to the heart, but it's okay. It's all right. But that's just the way teenagers' brains process, and it's how they learn. And so it's great when we can be a part of that.
Amen.
I think one of the other things we have to be prepared for is to have the hard conversations when rules are not being followed. And for me, it was always something that I did in partnership with the student minister. I tried not to have, if it was now, if it was just something very small, I might be able to just talk to the adult volunteer and the teenager together and say, oh, we need to make sure we do this when this happens, or, something like that. But if it is a major rule that they do violate for whatever reason, maybe they walk away and they're not in their assigned position, or they are on their phones too much, or they are like migrating to other friends' classrooms when they need to be staying in their spot. If it's some of the bigger things, maybe if the dress code violation is an issue, the bigger things, those were the kinds of conversations that I tried to make sure I had with the student minister and the teenage volunteer, just so that we made sure that we were just very clear when we had those hard conversations that we love them and we want them to participate and we are so glad that they are there. But these are our, important policies that we have in place, not just to protect our kids, but to protect you and to protect your adult volunteer. And so we want to just make sure you're understanding that these are the things that, need to be addressed and that we're ready to have those hard conversations when we need to have them.
Yeah, those hard conversations are hard but necessary.
Yes.
Have you had instances where you've needed to contact the parent of a teen helper because of behavior or an infraction or something like that?
Yeah, I have. And again, I try to work with the student minister when I do that because I want to make sure that we're presenting a unified front to the parents and that the student minister is completely up to speed with what's happening. So I always try to make that sort of a tandem conversation with a parent. And I usually also, if I did have to go to a parent, I always had really close relationships with our senior pastors. So anytime I talked with a parent in general, but especially if it was someone outside of my typical ministry, I made sure I would just give my senior pastor a heads up. Or, our executive pastor, whoever my, next in line person was, just in case somebody was offended by, a conversation, so that they would know that that might be coming. Because parents do sometimes are a little more overprotective of their teenagers. And so I tried to go into those conversations very carefully, but also they were really the big issues. They were the things where I was concerned that the teenager might be involved in something that could be harmful to themselves if there was a comment made or something that someone said or saw, or if they left campus for some reason, or if they tried to go to another area of the church completely, like if it was not just, they went next door to see their friend, but if they did try to sneak off, or if they were spending too much time on their phone in a way that had concerns about something. It was usually the bigger issues that I would try to take to a parent. I wouldn't try to do, because I know there might be things that are said or little things that are done that you might want to say, well, I'm going to tell your mom that No, I tried to make sure that it was something that concerned me enough about the welfare of the teenager that I felt like the parent needed to know. If it were if it was a smaller situation, then I would really lean to the student minister's advice about whether or not we talk to a parent about that. But I did always, I always wanted to be prepared, because there was also the opportunities that I had to talk with those parents, maybe if the parents didn't like some of the rules that we had and they wanted their teen to have more freedom or more responsibility or more, And so I always had to be prepared to talk to the parents at any time.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because I'm just thinking, I don't know, I say this in jest, but I feel like I've also had conversations basically like this. We're like, why won't you let my child scroll on Instagram and TikTok the whole time? And you're just like, come on.
Yes. Yes. I have, of course, we've talked about this before. I was the principal at a Christian school for many years. And I was children's minister for many years. I have had many teenage parents come to me angry about things that we would not allow their children to do, that you would think, those are just basic safety things that, I mean, like,
Mhm.
and I think it's because parenting a teenager is hard.
Mm.
And and adults handle it in different ways. And some handle it by being a little more permissive. Some handle it by wanting to be that buddy and that friend, and I'm going to let you do what you feel like you should do. And then there are some that are super overprotective. And so
Mhm.
you get a wide range of parenting responses to teenagers. And so that's why I just go back to policies and procedures are so very important. And knowing that sometimes you're going to have a parent that is going to be emotional about something, and you just need to show them grace and mercy and love, because parenting a teenager is hard. Just because maybe even if you have parented a teenager, not everyone has the same experiences. So we have to lead with grace and mercy and understand why they get passionate and why they feel like they have to fight for their kid for whatever reason. But as long as we have these policies and procedures in place, things that we know that we're going to allow and not allow, that you have church staff that are going to back you in that and support you in that.
Mm.
We want to make sure that we try to take the emotion out of it as much as we can and just lead with grace and mercy and love, and just, let them know, this is why this is a policy for the church, and I understand, but if you prefer your child not participate, we completely understand. But these are the policies that we have in place. Move forward in grace and mercy and love. Yeah.
Well, and people have such different ideas and expectations about ministry, about Vacation Bible School, about serving and what that looks like. And it's just sometimes it's good for me to occasionally have conversations with people where I am reminded that things that seem really clear and obvious to me are not clear and obvious to everybody,
Right.
especially to people who don't live in children's ministry world. Like
Right.
I need that reminder at least once every 6 months, and the Lord
Yeah.
sends somebody along to help me remember.
Yes.
Even with this current VBS, a particular person who didn't love some of changes that I made, or policies or procedures or, expectations, sort of having this conversation
Mm-hmm.
about VBS and realizing, one, that they had a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah.
And then coming in and seeing it with their own two eyes and being like, whoa.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so it's good to remember that not
Mm.
everybody understands ministry,
Right.
or understands what it is to serve, or has a very clear idea or good idea or understanding. And so sometimes it's just educating people
Yeah.
on, like, okay, this is how this is why this is the way that it is. And so,
Right.
giving people the benefit of the doubt that
Yeah.
it's sometimes just a lack of knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
not malicious. So
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's it. That's just, it's never an easy thing when emotions get involved. And we also don't know what's going on in a person's private life and in their home
Mm-hmm.
and what they're dealing with, and why maybe they've made these exceptions in their own rules or expectations that we might not see and understand. And I want to be understanding of that, and I want to be gracious in that. But I also have a reason for every policy I put into place. And a lot of that for me does have to do with the legal ramifications, because that's what helps us keep our kids and our families and our volunteers safe. And I never want to come across as seeming like I'm saying, oh, you're just worried about the legalities of it all. But for me, that's always helped me be able to process what are the hills that I'm going to die on, because what do I need to make sure that I stand firm with? And it's always going to come down to the rules of safety and security, how I can best help a child stay safe. So we really do have to decide ahead of time. These are our policies and procedures. These are the things that we're going to follow. we want to get input from people on that. You want to talk with other staff members. You want to talk with other volunteers, because we don't want to die on hills that are not really hills we needed to have died on. But we do need to make sure that we know these are the things that we are going to stick to. And if we have to have those conversations with parents, if we have to have those conversations with our teenage volunteers to help them understand we have these rules in place for a reason. That's really, I think, what it all comes down to. The more prepared we are with what our guidelines are and what responsibilities they have, that is just going to just bring success to all of us during this opportunity that we have, not just because our kids love working with the older teenagers. It means so much to them to see them involved and to see them excited to play with them and hang out with them and do crafts with them and teach them. But we want to make sure that it's all done in the most safe and secure way so that everybody can benefit from it. And so I think that is our heart today. Well, we just thank you. We thank you so much for joining us today. We thank you for taking your time with us. We appreciate it more than you can imagine. We hope that this has been helpful information and that we have helped you in another part of your ministry that maybe you might have been struggling with. We just ask that you would like and subscribe and all the things, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.